Step onto the field. I'm Patrick Dangerfield.
And I'm Josh Jenkins. Pat. Well, it is 16 minutes past 8 on Wednesday, October 12, which means the trade period ended 44 minutes ago. 40 minutes ago, they can get some deals done after the deadline. But what a frantic period in all that it was, but what a frantic few hours we've just seen and witnessed.
Yes, and this is our field trade special edition, but it's the most jam-packed, exciting trade period that I can remember, and only enhanced by the fact that last year was an absolute dud, let's be honest. Back of COVID, there just wasn't much that happened. Yet in the last half an hour, there just seemed to be so many deals that was still needing to be finished. There were clubs still chasing players and big name players. Like when you look back and review the players that have exchanged hands this trade period, I can't remember a trade period like it. Like we're talking Jaeger O'Meara as a bit of an afterthought. Like I really rate him as a player. Huge acquisition for Fremantle. So whilst they lose Lobb, they bring in someone like O'Meara, who you don't need Jaeger to play 22 games for you. You just need you need him to play the right games at the right time, which for Freo next year will be the back end of the season.
Don't go off too early, Pat. We're going to get through them, but all in all, dozens and dozens of deals done. So it started in a flurry as well. Way back when, 10 or so days ago, and things were busy across the first hour or two from about 3 p.m. when the deals were allowed to be relodged officially. For an hour or so, we saw some fringe and periphery players moved, and then in the last half an hour between 7 and 7:30, it was on for young and old. So we'll rip in and go through some of the main ones. So just some that went down at the absolute end of proceedings, Pat. So you mentioned Jaeger O'Meara. He gets to Freo. Basically a straight swap for Lloyd Meek plus a little future second. There's a caveat though, Pat. The reports are Hawthorn are going to pay an enormous amount of Jaeger's salary. There was a story that it was going to be 100%. It's not going to be 100, but it's going to be a lot.
And that's fine. As long as they're happy with the deal that they bring in. I think the story of this trade period for me is the clarity that quite clearly Hawthorn have on the direction that they're going. And that doesn't often happen. And you need a pretty special and, confident coach in what he can do. And there's few more confident than Mitch, but quite clearly, this is his plan. He'll have briefed the board on this last year when we found out that Mitchell's name and Jaeger's name was floated through last year's trade period. But for various reasons, that doesn't eventuate because of what we know is COVID. We're not sure on the future TPP, all that sort of thing. He's crystal clear with where they're going. Like, I know there's going to be short-term pain, but what you do not want to do is rebuild whilst Tasmania comes into the competition. Because we've seen from the Suns and GWS's introduction into the AFL, the teams that were rebuilding then are still, working through that rebuild now, some of them. So I think it's a concerted effort to go, we're not doing that. We're doing it now. We're doing it my way. And because of Mitch's, the way that he is, his personality, he will not care what is written about Hawthorn next year, how they're viewed, whether they're humming or, as most suspect, struggling. He won't care. He'll be crystal clear. And I dare say that'll extend to presentations at the board of, you got me in to do a job. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it my way. And this is it.
Interesting.
Do you like what they've done?
They're in for some pain. Make no mistake about it. They are in for some pain.
They've lost arguably their three best players.
Yes.
For not a huge return.
Yes.
But if this is your plan going forward, history tells you that it's always good to keep you more experienced players, but perhaps they're thinking, well, maybe we can get those in a different way. We can pay less for them from other clubs potentially next year, rather than high-ended salaries like we're led to believe with Mitchell and O'Meara.
Well, I'm not as in love with it as you are, but that's fine. That's the beauty.
It's not that I'm in love with it, but I understand if you're going to take a direction, then all in. Don't go half-assed.
Well, they're all in. They're all in. Trust me. They are in for some pain next year. So Tom Mitchell goes to Collingwood as well. So a Brownlow medalist is an afterthought in the trade period. He goes to the Pies. That's handy.
That was the irony around what I felt when Collingwood were reneging on the deal for 25, yet they were offering pick 41 for a Brownlow medalist at 28, 29, Tom Mitchell.
Yes.
I still think he's at the peak of his powers.
Well, I think that's where people have a different view. So he goes to Collingwood. Josh Dunkley gets his wish. It went down to the wire last time and beyond. He didn't get his wish last time when he tried to go from the Dogs to Essendon. He gets to the Lions. So the Lions have had a very good trade period, Pat. They bring in Dunkley, they bring in Gunston, and they think and they say they've got enough points for the two kids in the draft. So on paper, the Lions look good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Dunkley's a great acquisition. He's the big-bodied midfielder that they've probably lacked. Best and fairest winner premiership player. He adds more experience to that part of the ground. Gunston does the same thing for their forward line. I think he's a wonderful player.
Yep.
And I think in a way he'll be a really good leader for that forward line. I reckon Joe Danaher, he's happy to be told where to go. And I reckon Jack is going to be really comfortable to do that. He's a 3-time premiership player, All-Australian. He's done it. And he'll organise them. So I love what they've done. And they'll obviously get Ashcroft with that pick. Their father-son, who would have been pick number 1. He'll come in and play immediately. They're shaping up as a really strong
yes,
agreed.
And Jasper Fletcher sort of will come to them as well around a pick 15 or so, they say, if he was in the draft as normal. Ollie Henry, that deal gets done. So there's some other movement that helps make that work. But Ollie Henry gets his wish to join your Cats, Pat, and play alongside his brother Jack. And it had to get done, didn't it? Because whoever gave the advice, but he did come out strongly and tell the Pies he wasn't coming back. He'd go to the draft. So he kind of alienated himself in a sense, but all's well that ends well. And he ends up at Cardinia Park.
Yeah, and I suspect that if you're Collingwood, you've already moved Brodie Grundy on for pick 27, a dual All-Australian, phenomenal player. You can't let Henry go as much as you want to be strong. You can't let him go for nothing when 25 is on the table. What they do get quite clearly is a Brownlow medalist at 28, 29, who I think can add some real value to what they have inside their centre square, particularly when you look at Taylor Adams, who by all accounts, it's a ruptured adductor. That's a significant injury. And the timeline, particularly as players get older, and Tay now is at the back end of his career rather than the start. He's still got some good years left, but it's going to take some time to get back. This way, you don't have to rush him. Mate, take your time. You'll be ready when you're ready. We've got a Brownlow medalist coming in, prolific ball winner. He'll have to adjust to Collingwood style, how quickly they move the ball. It's less chip, but it is charge.
Yes.
And, I think it's a good acquisition. They get 25, the Brownlow medalist, and they lose Henry. I think they've done well.
Big Rory Lobb gets his wish as well. This one went down to the wire and some toing and froing from Colin Young, the big strapping man that he is. He had the stand cameras follow him every step of the way. But ultimately, Lobb gets to the Dogs and the Dogs get their man. This was identified months and months ago, and Rory Lobb ends up at the kennel.
Yeah, I think they'll be pleased with that. I think he's been a more consistent AFL performer quite clearly than what Josh Shackey's been. So Melbourne acquire him for, I think it's a future 4th-round pick. So I like what they've done, the ability to go in the ruck, particularly if there's a 23rd player introduced next season. So at the moment, it's 22 plus the medical sub. What we're hearing at the moment is that may potentially be just an extra man on the bench. If that is the case, then the flexibility of Lobb to be able to be a relief ruckman. They've obviously got Tim English, who is a really up-and-coming strong prospect in the ruck. Yep. He's going to play a lot of footy. I think it straightens them up a bit. And I think with where they're at, and I know there's different views around this in terms of the tall timber. I've seen him live. He was one of the few players I've seen live this year. and he destroyed St Kilda at Etihad. So I think they'll be happy with that.
Marvel, come on, you're a fan of Marvel. You got to get the sponsors right. Jason Horne-Francis, imagine it's taken us 6 or 7 names to get to last year's number 1 pick. So Jason Horne-Francis is a part of that monstrous, mega, huge deal. He gets his way to Port Adelaide. And just on that, we'll talk about Horne-Francis involved in it. But the mega deal, so it was huge swapping of picks. So Junior Rioli and Horne-Francis get to Port. The Giants get pick 1, which will effectively become pick 2, but for now it's pick 1. The Kangas, they get pick 2 and 3. That'll become 3 and 4. And West Coast go from 2 and drop back to 8 and 12. Pat, this was a sign of the things of the future, this deal. But ultimately, the headline act is Horne-Francis, last year's number 1 pick, going from North to the Power.
And as it should be in terms of he's the headline player out of all this. The draft picks, we don't know yet. Now, North Melbourne may very well win this trade, but we will not know for years and years to come. That being said, like for all the conjecture and discussion around the character of Horne-Francis, if you just view his football tape from his drafted year, is special.
Mm-hmm.
He's a special player. And perhaps in that comfortable home environment, Ken won't be easy on him. He's they run a tight ship at Port. But I think it's an environment that certainly he's got the potential to flourish there. I think he's a generational player. I strongly believe that. So to get him in the door, you just do what you need to do. You sell the farm, you give away the future for it. But I think it's a calculated decision by Port. Plus they get in Junior Rioli, a small forward that they've definitely needed. So yeah, I think they've done well out of this trade. That being said, we need to take a few years before we decide on how North have fared, because we won't know until we find out who they've selected. Now, Cadman's the big strapping key forward that everyone perceived as that number 1 pick if you don't have Ashcroft, who's off as a father-son of the Western Bulldogs. I don't think they necessarily need Cadman with Larkey and the tools that they've already got in their forward line.
Yeah.
So perhaps pick the eyes out of it, get a couple of gun mids. They're already really strong in that area, but I don't mind what they've done.
Yeah, I like it all round. One thing, having covered trade or done trade period for Trade Radio, I don't enjoy the after the fact who won based on who was picked with the pick. Yep. Because you don't know. You just don't know who you're getting. Maybe in the top 10, you can argue, we knew we were going to get this guy. So West Coast clearly have gone from 2 back to 8 and 12 because they've got their eyes on 2 local kids. There's no doubt. Now, whether they get them, that remains to be seen, but they clearly have their eyes on that. But if you're trading 29 and that becomes an All-Australian, well, I mean, you can't foresee that. So that was one thing that annoyed me across the trade period, that hindsight heroism. When you look back and think, pick 48 became such and such, so they won the trade. Well, you weren't to know that at the time.
Correct. And for all I think the Hawthorn bashing that we'll see, if they win a flag in 6 years' time, who's going to be the team laughing? But you don't know until you get there. Every team has their own strategic direction that they're willing to take. The key is not wavering from it, sticking to your guns. And that's why I said, for someone like Sam Mitchell as coach, he would just as likely say, well, I'm going to do it my way, or you can move me on. You can fire me.
Yep.
But this is what we're doing. I'm sticking to it and stay fat.
I like it. Jack Bowes, of course, he was one of the more topical names that was that came up across the period. He and pick 7 go to the Cats in exchange for a future round 3. Now, he is just going to be the pioneer of something that's going to become the norm. I spoke to a few people, a couple of play managers and a few list people today during the deadline day at Marvel, and they just said that it looks stunning and it looks a little doesn't quite pass the eye test, but pick 7 probably in the future it might be Jack Bowes and pick 20 or 25. It won't be a top 10 pick, but it is the one that certainly is, I know the mega trade with Horne-Francis, and that was a lot to take in, but the Jack Bowes pick 7, that was the one that probably your general footy fan had the most trouble working out.
Yeah, and it was interesting listening to Craig Cameron talk about their position of having players interested in coming to the Gold Coast, but not having the cap room in order to facilitate that. So this deal, as much as anything, was around structuring their team so they are able to engage in those conversations. I agree. I think this will become the norm. Every team is going to do it at different stages. I think most teams now will be paying 100% of their salary or slightly above each year. Now, how does that work? Teams can pay a minimum of 95% of their salary, but what's the point? If you can buy in draft picks for a salary offload, you absolutely, it's worth doing. The one caveat I will talk about with Geelong and Jack was that he was one that was identified, in June, far earlier. Having watched some of his footy, I know Andrew Mackey's been all over him. So it was more about what he can do. I see him as that, he plays a bit like Mitch Duncan. He's really clean with the ball. He's a really good decision maker. But he's probably a bit better than Mitch overhead. And Mitch has had an incredible career, obviously. But we see some real upside with what he's going to be able to provide to our midfield and the flexibility to play other positions as well.
Your involvement was thrown around. Just confirm or deny. Were you involved in the process?
Well, we're the same management, so
yes.
I'd ask the question halfway through the year, around where he's at, and it was more asking Andrew Mackey, and Mac is his response was, I'm all over him. So it's nice for that one to come through, and we're really excited with what he can bring to the team.
Indeed. Luke Jackson goes from Melbourne to Freo now. This is Pat. I use this all week on Trade Radio. So he goes to Freo for pick 13, a future first and a future second. Now what goes back is there as well. But I would always try and say future round 1. Well, what does that mean? I try and it's Freo's future first. So I'm just say Freo finish between 5th and 8th. And then you can say, well, it's a pick 10 to pick 12 to pick 13 as well. So it's effectively, you can mount the argument or make the claim that it's pick 13 this year, pick 13 next year, and then a round 2 beyond that. So that seems like a decent haul for Melbourne, albeit he was a pick 3 and is now a premiership winning ruck/utility.
Yeah, and Shannon Burns, who is Geelong's runner, obviously works in welfare for us. He was at Melbourne last season, and you and I both discussed him, and I reckon if he could pick any player in the competition, it's just about him. He rates him incredibly highly. But I think this is a win-win for both clubs, because Melbourne replace, in terms of nailed on form right at this moment, Brodie Grundy, I think, is a better player than Jackson.
Great.
Now, Luke Jackson may become an all-timer, but right at this very moment, Brodie Grundy's a dual All-Australian. Yes, he's had his injury concerns this year, but if he can get that right, he's as consistent a ruck. And probably if we're talking a challenger to the mantle of Max Gawn as a best ruckman, well, it's him. So now they're in the same side. So how they balance that will be an interesting conundrum for Melbourne to manage. Once again, if there's an extra man brought onto the bench, then it makes it easier. Is that something potentially they've discussed? Maybe. But if you're Fremantle, you've got a guy that comes in. He's going to play for the next decade for you. He'll sit on heads. He'll run up and down Optus. And I like the balance they've got with the huge power, in a sense, in terms of Darcy. And then you've got this athletic freak in Luke Jackson. So I think both teams will be pleased as Melbourne could possibly be on losing a former pick 3.
Agree. 2 big men, 2 big powerful men are better than one. It's as simple as that. As far as I'm concerned, you worry about where to mix and match them. They're all skilled. They're all talented. They're all smart. They all know how to play the game. A couple of other big deals before we just rip through some of the others who are who were done. Hopper and Taranto both get to Richmond in the end. So Richmond bolster their midfield. They both signed 7-year deals. So they're both going to be at Richmond long term. And Richmond basically reinvigorate their midfield in one trade period.
Yeah, so we'll see how it pans out, I think. I think both stars of the game, absolutely. They've maxed out in terms of their spend. But as I've discussed on our show before, the team that gets the player generally gets the win, because the other team, GWS in this example, we don't know. They may, but we won't know for years now until we find out what they've done draft day. Whereas Richmond, they bring in Taranto and Hopper. I really rate Hopper. I think we've sort of forgotten a bit about how good he can be as that inside ball. All of a sudden, they become a real handful again. Not that they weren't this season, but particularly with the fact that they kept Soldo and didn't have to include him in that deal. So, yeah, I think they're in a good spot.
Oh, it's a good crew. Taranto, Hopper, Dustin Martin, Shea Bolton, Down Prestia, Jack Graham stays there, all around.
Trent Cotchin,
very good mix around the footy. Izak Rankine, he Adelaide pulled off a coup late in the season, convincing him to come home and play for the Crows. So he gets done for pick 5. That seems almost, for one of the blockbuster deals, it seemed pretty straightforward. Pick 5 for Izak Rankine.
Yeah, and we discussed last week on our show around, would there be buyer's remorse with Adelaide, until we did a little bit more of a deeper dive in terms of what Adelaide offered for pick 1 last year, who they knew was going to be Jason Horne-Francis. So they offered pick their first round this year, which is pick 5. They offered last year's pick 6 and their last year's pick 12. They turned that into Rochelle, into Dawson, who is a star. An absolute star. And they turn it into Rankine. I think Adelaide are pretty happy with what they've done with those 3 picks.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. That just shows that sometimes the picks are worth more than the player, but it's just always an exception to the rule to prove the rule. A few others. Sam Weideman goes to Western looking for opportunity, so he's going to play forward alongside Peter Wright. I was in there today and I saw Adrian Dodora and I said, is he going to play forward or back? And he said forward. And I said, you've made the wrong call. He's got to go back. So we'll see who's right there. Tanner Bruhn's a young man who joins you, Pat, in at the Cattery. Have you? I think you've already said on the main pod that you've been in touch with the young man, but you'll be looking forward to meeting him if you haven't already.
Yeah, absolutely. So got it for coffee and lunch the other day, actually. And in terms of Joel going out of the side, I think Tanner can play that midfield position. He plays a bit like Jai Simpkin. I think, if he's as good as Jai, then he's in for a hell of a career. So with Bose and Tanner, no one can replace Joel Selwood, but I think they go a long way to adding to that midfield group.
Stop me when you want to mention someone, because there's a heap to get through. We mentioned Shacky. Aaron Francis goes to Sydney, perhaps in the mould of Paddy McCartan.
I'm keen to see this. I'm not going to stop you on everyone, but I don't mind this. He's a former pick 6. Sydney have this innate ability in turning players that have struggled at other clubs into genuine contributors in a new environment. I think that's a really good get.
Yeah, I like it too. We had Kinnear Beatson on SEN when I was working with Andy Marr, and he just said it was on the back of Paddy McCartan. It was an opportunity. He wanted to be away from the bubble. He went up and met with the Sydney psych, and she explained a lot of what it's like to live in Sydney, and that suited Aaron. So we'll wish him the best, and hopefully he gets a run at it. Junior Rioli, we mentioned, goes to Port. Lockie Hunter was one that jumped up late in the process, and he ends up the premiership winning dog. He ends up at the D's. He's going to play a bit of wing, a bit of half forward. Billy Frampton finds his 3rd club, so he goes from Adelaide to Collingwood after previously being at Port. He's probably going to try and fill that role left by big roughhead. Lloyd Meek goes to the Hawks. Toby Bedford gets an opportunity at the Giants. Tom Berry goes from Brisbane to Gold Coast. He won't have to move far. Josh Corbett goes from Gold Coast to Freo. He will have to move a long way. Benny Long got a nice contract to go from the Saints to Gold Coast. Blake Acres will go and play on the wing for the Blues, and
he's one of the steals of the trade period. Blake Acres,
future round 3 pick.
Yep, you pay him 300 odd. He'll play every game, and you can put him on a wing and say, "Mate, we'll see you in 4 quarters."
Yeah, I like it. Griffin Logue and Darcy Tucker. Well, Griffin Logue was certainly the main part to that deal. So Griffin Logue, a player I've got enormous time for. I love him as a second or third key defender down there. He's a sneaky good athlete. I've described him as one of the sneakiest, best athletes in the game. So he and Tucker go to the Roos for a future second, third, and fourth. So a fair bit coming back the other way. And Cooper Stevens, before I mention a few of the free agents and a few of the different ones, Cooper Stevens, teammate of ours, but yours more recently, he goes to Hawthorn. What can you tell Hawks fans about Cooper Stevens, former pick 16?
Yeah, I think Hawks fans will be really pleased with the addition of Cooper. And obviously there's a few really significant holes to fill in Hawthorn's midfield with O'Meara and Mitchell going out. Arguably their two best midfielders. But Cooper in his third season, it was probably going to be challenging for him to play in the Cats midfield next year, but I don't think impossible. He's got a great work ethic. He's a really good kid. I've done a lot of work with Coops sort of throughout this year, and his attitude going into the finals was, how can I help you the best I can, as a 15-year player, achieve your goal. I'll play like whoever, you're playing this week. So he's a really good person. And it'll be great to see him get his opportunity there. I think he'll swallow up the work that Sam will put, that Hawthorn team through, which no doubt will be plenty. But I think they'll like what they'll see.
Indeed. And then, of course, Liam Jones comes back from a year off footy. He goes to the Dogs on a 3-year deal, which I think he's about 32. So that's a lot.
Surprised me how long that was.
Yeah, agreed. Because I think he'll be 32, 33, 34, if not even further advanced than that. And then Mcstay, he goes to the Pies, of course. Jaden Hunt goes out west, so he'll bring some speed to West Coast. Bobby Hill ends up at the Pies. Carl Amon was the first free agent to move. He ends up at Hawthorn. So that's almost everyone, Pat. One or two that didn't get their wish.
I think just on Mcstay and Bobby Hill, I see those acquisitions as system-based players.
Yeah.
So whilst there's been criticism of, well, what's he done at Brisbane, I think Mcstay for Collingwood is a system-based player with the way that they want to construct their team. And quite clearly, part of that system isn't spending really big money on your ruckman. So it's system-based. Ruckman with that game style that's free-flowing. It's get the ball off the line and then shotgun it, move it as fast as you possibly can and slingshot it into your forward line. So I see both those two as system-based.
I really like the look of Collingwood's forward line. It's different. It's the way they want it to look. So it
suits their style.
Dynamic. It's dynamic. Mcstay's a dynamic athlete. Nathan Kruger, who you and I know well, he's one of the most dynamic athletes you could come across. Ash Johnson's the same. Elliott's dynamic. They're all dynamic. Ginnivan's, dangerous down there. So, and then you got Mychek, who's the workhorse. So it's a nice forward line. I absolutely agree. A couple of guys who missed out. Jeremy Sharp was trying to get out west. He didn't get his wish. And a teammate of yours again, Geelong have been busy. Esava Ratugolea doesn't. So pick 33 was on the table for a long time. Say Port Adelaide. That in the end doesn't happen, and he remains a Cat. Now there was a lot of commentary over the past day or two about that being a fair deal. Now you and I have spoken about it, but why do you think the Cats held firm on keeping Esava?
Well, to be honest, I know it's disappointing for a player when they want to move and it doesn't get done, and then they come back to the team. But what I will say is he'll be just totally embraced by everyone on walking back in the door. He's overseas at the moment with 13 players over in Ireland, all watching Mark O'Connor play in the Gaelic game over there. I actually see him playing a lot of football next year. I think he's found his rightful position
down back
as that, fullback, centre half back, with the ability to play ruck. So I actually think he's going to play a lot of footy. It's hard to find 197s, Josh, that are 106 kilos that are explosive as hell.
And if he doesn't play, from Geelong's point of view, again, I'm looking at this from a neutral position. If he doesn't play and he's not in their best side, if someone goes down in the back six, he's the next one in, and he's the only next one in. So if you want to go and have a look at the Cats list, there is not a lot of tall defensive depth on that list, because Shannon Neal looks really good in the forward line. And apart from that, and you can speak to this, there's not much there in terms of tall defensive stocks. So from Geelong's point of view, they probably thought, yes, we'd love to give you your opportunity, but we've got to do what's right for us too.
Yeah, and to be honest, he's Chris's favourite player. Genuinely, his favourite player. So he loves how he goes about his footy. So I think Sav will see increased opportunities next year, and I think he can find his position in that back six, especially when there's the ability of some of those players down there to play multiple positions as well.
Yep. All right, now we're done, because it's been big. Now I've just found a tweet, Pat. I'm going to play it. If it's no good, our man Rowan can just take it out. But it's off afl.com.au. It's Kinnear Beatson, the Sydney Swans GM of list management and player personnel, and he is a very sharp and shrewd operator. And the quote is, I haven't heard it yet, I'm about to play it. The quote is, "That's one of the dumbest questions I've ever had asked." So let's have a listen and see what it sounds like. Just give me a second. I'll wind it up and we'll see where it lands. All right.
The talent come draft time, what type of players you might be looking for? You got Angus Sheldrick last year, who's one of Cal's personal favourites, as we know. What type of player would you be looking for this year?
No, we haven't looked at the talent pool yet, Riley. That is one of the dumbest questions I've ever asked, Riley. Seriously.
So cop that. So if you didn't quite catch that, Riley Beveridge from afl.com.au said, "Have you had a look at the draft pool yet?" And Kinnear said, "Stuff him. I'm going to clip him." That is one of the dumbest questions I've ever heard. That sums up at the trade period and where we're at. Everyone's tired. Everyone's still weary, Pat.
And if you want, I think, the mood encapsulated in one person, it's Liam Pickering answering questions around the dealings with the Dunkley deal and how he felt both clubs, or perhaps one club, had dealt with it, and the machinations over the swapping of a future fourth. That I think his quote was, "They're not even going to use it anyway."
Yeah. Oh, having been in there, they're in one common area eating pizza together and having a great time, and then they go into their war rooms and they just become enemies. But
it's like the dog. The dogs that if they're separated by a fence,
they want to brawl.
They're all over each other. And then you open up the door and they just come in there and lick each other's butts.
Well, it's something you and I have both been involved in a couple of times for me and once for you in a big, big way. But it's all done. The 2022 trade period, the biggest ever, Pat, is all done. Now, of course, you're watching this on YouTube, I hope. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't.
Yes.
Join the thousands who are involved, and thefieldau.com, all the socials, podcasts, all that. We're flying. We're having a great time bringing and producing all this content, Pat. So that's us.
And we are giving away a signed Geelong Guernsey. So the Premier's Guernsey this
5 more days
is going to be given away. So sign up to both the YouTube channel and, of course, subscribe on our podcast for your chance to win. And if it's tight, we might even just give away 2 of them, Josh. So all happening on the Field AU.
There you go. This has been the Field AU with JJ and Danger, the trade special. We'll chat to you again later.